Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share button because it is your support that makes this possible. My friends, I want to thank you all as always for tuning in. Your emails, your notes, your texts, your tweets means the world to me. I'm grateful you all listen to the show and grateful you share it with family and friends. We surpassed 100,000 downloads just a couple of months ago, and we're already quickly surpassing 150,000 downloads. And I have some great news. SiriusXM renewed my contract with them for another year. So you're stuck with me for at least another year. We are now entering season 5 of the Qasim Rashid Show. We'll be surpassing our 200th episode here pretty soon. Major kudos to my amazing producer Alexa, who puts up with me and puts together a phenomenal show every single week. So send her all the flowers and love in the world. We've got a really important show this week. Our guest is DNC Vice Chair Shasti Conrad, who is one of the youngest vice chairs in the country. She is one of the youngest party chairs in the country. She's the state party chair of the Washington State Democrats, and we are talking everything from genocide in Palestine to why party leadership refuses to endorse Zohran Mamdani, and basically everything that's wrong with the party, in my opinion. And I have to give her flowers for coming on to have these tough conversations. And I think I was impressed with her answers. I thought they were frankly very honest and very transparent and very genuine. And I feel like we need more of that in the party. So we'll be talking about her. Obviously, two big elephants in the room. One, we will be talking about the 24-year anniversary of 9/11. I have thoughts I want to share. And we'll be talking about the murder of Charlie Kirk and kind of what we do with this. Where do we go with this? Probably one of the most significant assassinations in modern American history. Of course, the horrific assassination of Melissa Hortman, the Speaker of the House in Minnesota just a few months ago, is another example of that. And we're seeing this extraordinary dichotomy from the right, where they're outraged about Kirk, as they should be, but these are the same people that were completely muted on the murder of Speaker Hortman. I pointed out the hypocrisy on my social media of Donald Trump lowering flags to half staff for Kirk, but then refusing to even so much as call the family of Speaker Hortman, refusing to call Governor Tim Walz. In fact, openly mocking them and calling them unhinged and saying he has no intent or desire or need to call them. And I think this is a hypocrisy we need to call out. You don't facilitate peace by enabling or engaging in such hypocrisy. In fact, that's a great way to create more animosity and more hatred and more distrust and more violence and more division and more discord. So we'll be talking about that in detail. But first, we're going to go to break here in just a second. And when we come back, I'm excited to speak with DNC Vice Chair Shasti Conrad, one of the youngest, most dynamic party leaders, first South Asian woman elected to this important position, and someone who, again, I had not interviewed before. I had not had the chance to speak with her before, but her reputation preceded herself, and I was excited to have the conversation with her. And I think you'll be happy with her answers on a lot of these things. But keep me honest. Let me know what you think. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. We'll be right back after this break with DNC Vice Chair Shasti Conrad. Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. None of my content is behind a paywall ever, but those who are able to subscribe, you help support this work and make it possible. I'm extraordinarily excited to welcome our guest this week, DNC Vice Chair Shasti Conrad. Shasti, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You know, the world is kind of on fire, literally and figuratively. We've got a madman in the White House who is soon to be deploying the military to probably every city in the country, which my theory is he's trying to shift the Overton window to normalize martial law and military occupation. The economy is on the cusp of being in free fall. You know, billionaires are obviously getting extraordinarily wealthy. And the reason why I'm grateful to have this conversation with you is because I think, you know, as a Democrat myself, as someone who's run for office as a Democrat, who's been the Democratic nominee for US Congress, it's frustrating to me that despite all these horrific things that Donald Trump is doing, somehow the Democratic Party has a lower approval rating than Donald Trump right now. And that's kind of been consistent over the last year or so as well, at least since last November. And I think just to kick off our conversation, to kind of get straight to it, why do you think we continue to have such a low approval rating, even when facing somebody who is as just terrible as is Donald Trump?
Well, you said a lot there, and I think you're right to set the stage of there's so many things that we are up against. And, you know, when you lose a big election the way that we did last year, you know, of course, people are going to be disappointed and people are going to have rightful rage and criticism of the party. I think that there has been a loss of confidence in the party that extended, you know, before just last year and last year's election. I think, you know, overall, people's sense of identity around a party has shifted a lot. But I think people are looking for a fight. Like, that, you know, I think we are watching as the Republicans have become, you know, so radicalized that they, as you said, are fully preparing for martial law and have really given up on democracy. And I think that folks are looking to Democrats to recognize that this is not normal, you know, that nothing that we are experiencing right now is normal, and they want to see us step up, they want to see us fight. And I think, you know, it was a little slow in the beginning of this year. You know, it took a minute for party leaders, for elected leaders to sort of come out with that kind of fight energy that we've needed. I do feel like there has been a shift in the last, you know, month or two where, especially around like redistricting, you're starting to see that fight come back in the Democratic Party, and you are starting to see those approval ratings starting to sort of, you know, as Trump's are, you know, plummeting, ours are starting to come up. And when you look at the actual issues, our policies are very popular. It's just that the identity as a, you know, a party and as a Democrat, that has shifted. That's been struggling, and I think that is what we're trying to figure out how to fix right now.
I think that's part of the conundrum, that the policies are extraordinarily popular. When you remove the labels from them, and people have done this on the man on the street type of content where they'll just present, you know, a policy and see if people like it or not. And we see, you know, reproductive health, abortion access is more than 70% popular. A living wage is extraordinarily popular. Ending never-ending wars is extraordinarily popular. Healthcare as a human right is extraordinarily popular. But that's why I think there's so much confusion as to why the party continues to struggle. One of my theories, and again, I want to get your thoughts on this, is that Democrats as voters expect their electeds to be people of principle. I feel like Republicans are willing to let go of everything as long as this Christian nationalism, or nationalist Christians, Nazis, as I've been told to call them, as long as that advances, they'll let go of everything else. They don't, you know, they'll talk about Bill Clinton is immoral because he committed adultery, but then excuse Donald Trump for being, you know, an adjudicated rapist and sexually abusing at least 28 women that we know of, and God knows what's in the Epstein files. They'll talk about the importance of the economy, but ignore the fact that every period of economic growth has come under Democratic presidents over the last 50 years. And the data is just staggering on this. But Democrats, I feel like we hold our electeds to a higher standard. And this is why, on one hand, you know, we'll see, you know, statements made about working families and the importance of working families, but then the failure to raise the living wage. Or we'll see the importance of getting corporate money out of politics, but then more billionaires are supporting left-leaning candidates, and more, you know, there's corporate Democrats that will take absurd amounts of corporate money from corporations like United Health and Amazon and Exxon, these exploitative corporations. How do we ensure that the electeds and the messaging that the party is given matches the actions of those who are in office right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right on. I think that, and I think it's also the ways in which we organize differently as Democrats than I think Republicans do. There's the famous adage, right, of like Republicans fall or Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. And I think, as Democrats, like we have to be coalitional.
Yeah.
We are trying, the overused phrase of the building the big tent, but like that is very true. We are trying to build a organization and build with people that come from so many different backgrounds, and you're trying to bring stakeholders together who have agree on 90%, but often we get stuck on those like sort of 10% of maybe slight differences and trying to get to agreement there. Republicans don't have to do that. They really are. It's like the technocrats, the billionaires. They set how it's going to go, and people fall right in line. And that's easier, and it's easier if you don't care about laws. You don't care about a functional government. I mean, it's much easier to be anti. And I do think that some of the sort of, psychology of Democrats is that many of our folks come from marginalized backgrounds, and so we are used to being let down. We are used to, there's that sort of mentality of not wanting to entirely put our faith in leaders because we have been let down from time, election after election cycle. And, I think what you're seeing, too, is these discussions around generational shifts in the Democratic Party. That's happening because people are saying we've got to have leaders regardless of age, but like we have to have leaders who are going to walk the talk, who are going to actually back up and do what they say they're going to do, and that we do actually have a popular progressive agenda, and we need people who are going to uphold that and actually put that in place. And when we're in power, we have to use it and not be afraid and not do this sort of capitulating of, well, I think a lot of times Democrats get into this sort of, we overthink it, we're driven by data, and then we do everything incrementally and at this glacial rate, and that is not what people want. People want to know that if they're going to elect somebody, that person is going to actually make a difference and that their lives will improve. And we haven't, I think Biden was a very progressive president in many ways, but we did not tell that story. We did not people didn't feel it, and we didn't claim those victories in a way in which it made a difference and people just couldn't see it. And so here we are.
And one great example of that, and I have plenty of criticisms of Biden, but credit where due, the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act that he passed, these were historic pieces of legislation. Mm-hmm. And with the infrastructure bill, parts of it being chipped away and repealed, we're seeing MAGA farmers talk about how they made investments in property and in infrastructure that they can't pay for now because Trump repealed it. I've yet to see Democrats take that and run with that and say, hey, we tried our best and we delivered on our promise, and this guy is screwing you over. I feel like we lose the messaging aspect of it. So one, to your point, Chair Conrad, is we're not walking the talk, and then two, even on the talk side, we're letting it go, and we're missing the point here. And we keep adhering to this rule book when there is no rule book anymore.
Absolutely.
And aggravating that. And by the way, I for those who are not familiar with the amazing work that Chair Conrad has done, you've been doing this for decades, and you've been the first of many, right? Just the list would be the rest of the show if we just talked about it. And so I want to reemphasize to those watching that Chair Conrad is an example of somebody who isn't just talking the talk, but she's walked the walk, and she's gotten to where she is because she's walked the walk. And I want to commend you and give you your flowers because you deserve all the credit in the world. And the fact that you're taking on this interview, answering these tough questions when other folks in the party aren't willing to have these conversations, which is, I think, one of the frustrations too. What do you think is frightening party leadership to do something as simple as say, you know what, I may not agree with Zohran Mamdani and everything, but he is the duly chosen Democratic nominee for the largest city in the country, and he has my support, full-throated support. We're going to get behind him. And where we disagree, we're going to work together and figure it out. But he is the Democratic nominee. We cannot lose this seat to a centrist or a Republican. So he has my support. Why is that so difficult for the Hakeem Jeffries and the Ken Martins and the Chuck Schumers of the world, the Kirsten Gillibrands, why are they not willing to make that very simple statement?
Well, I do want to give credit where credit's due, which is that our chair, Ken Martin, did congratulate Mamdani, basically the next day as soon as the results were certified, and has met with him, and our chair has not denied that. So, and I came out very quickly that same night. I had been newly elected as vice chair and came out to support him as well. I think it's very exciting what is happening in New York City, and I watched with those same questions of why other Democratic leaders are not endorsing and are not fully supportive. I'm a longtime progressive. I worked on both Bernie campaigns in 2016 and 2020. And have always been, I always have to remind people that Obama was the progressive candidate in 2008. That's the end of the party that I have lived in. But I've also chosen to go into the party to try to make it so that it would be more open for and more fair to candidates like Mamdani to be able to have a fair shot. And I think, again, he did an amazing job of building a really incredible coalition that included Brad Lander supporters and, people from across the party who were able to say, like, yeah, this guy, we want this guy. We don't want Cuomo. And, as someone who has also fought really hard in the Me Too movement to try to clean up these, political spaces so that they're safe for women, yeah, I have been challenged by the fact that there are certain people that have not come out to fully be vocal about their support for him. And he did win the Democratic primary. So I think, that's where I sit. So I am in a similar place as you of sort of questioning where that is. But I do think that some of that is, folks want to make sure that they're backing a winner. And there is often that sort of hesitation about supporting the progressive and what that means and what that opens up. But our chair, Ken Martin, has also been really strong on a neutrality pledge that the officers take as a way of making sure that we don't put thumbs on scales. And, I see that as also being a progressive position because a lot of times the thumbs on scales would have been to fully support the much more moderate centrist candidate. And people are going to do what they're going to do, but I think that we should all be watching to see the energy and the excitement that Mamdani is creating. And I do think that is a playbook that won't work everywhere, but I think certainly works well in a lot of parts of the country.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it, right? I mean, it doesn't need to work everywhere. It needs to work where he's running, right? All politics are local, and you need to appeal to the local electorate. And he's running on affordability, which is what the party should align itself to. And I I do recognize that Chair Martin has been clear that we're not going to put our thumbs on the scale. I commend him for that. And I would build upon that the Hakeem Jeffries and the Cory Bookers and the Schumers, the Gillibrands of the world, I need to understand that, now we're past the primary. Now you need to put your thumb on the scale to make sure that we win this seat. Because look, at the end of the day, if by some situation Cuomo ends up winning this, the message that it's going to send, and this is what I'm genuinely afraid about, the message that it's going to send is that vote blue no matter who means vote for the straight white male centrist when we tell you to. Otherwise, tough luck. It's going to say that, yeah, we don't like Trump because he's a credibly accused sexual abuser and probably a rapist. But when our guy does it, it's okay with Cuomo. And that is going to devastate the momentum that you very thoughtfully shared earlier on, that we are building momentum. And with something as high profile as this coming into midterms, if the establishment part of the party fumbles this and snatches victory snatches defeat from the jaws of victory, whatever the phrase is, I feel like it's going to have a ripple effect on midterms, and it's going to allow Trump to stay in power, especially with the gerrymandering aspect of it.
I hear you on that, and I'll just say, I mean, I think that it's important that there's party unity whenever that candidate is someone that has, we all believe in democracy. That's what I think is these days is the number one thing, right, of being a Democrat, is that you believe that voters should be able to vote for their elected leaders. And, there's no doubt that Mamdani won that Democratic primary. And so we will see. And look, I've worked on these progressive campaigns in red states and blue states, and have found time and time again that progressive policies are popular, even in, these like, these red states, and that are oftentimes mostly they're voter suppressed states. There's
Yeah.
large communities of color, and I worked on a Senate campaign in Georgia, and I've spent time throughout the South, and there's large voting blocks that very much would actually probably align with what Mamdani's doing, and yet have for decades and decades and decades have not been able to be fully represented. So, and I will say also on the affordability piece of it, I mean, you had Alyssa Slotkin also agreeing and saying that affordability is like the number one issue. So, these are not wild policy positions. These
Right.
are
Yeah.
addressing people's, needs, and understanding the community that you're going to represent. And so, my hope is that there's victory for him, and that folks
I
will continue to support and get on that
and,
train.
and I want to acknowledge, Sir Conrad, the inherent, in my view, kind of the contradiction I have in grilling you on these questions, because you're all aligned, not just in your words, but people can go back and look at the receipts and you're like, yeah, I've been there, I get it. Welcome to my world. I've been fighting this battle for a long time. It's about time you showed up. I get all that, and I want to respect that and honor that as well. But shifting to where I think the party simply needs to do to a different topic, where the party needs to catch up with its voter base, is on Gaza. Recently, the world's largest conglomerate of scholars on genocide voted 86% that yes, what's happening is absolutely a genocide. We are seeing poll after poll. Now 92% of Democrats want to stop funding Netanyahu because they don't support what he is doing there. Last summer we saw the whirlwind of the Harris Waltz campaign. I was one of those who was critical of Biden and of Harris and Waltz, and I was still campaigning in Georgia and in Michigan, especially coming into the final weeks, going door to door to make sure we got the turnout to prevent Trump from winning. And where I was critical, it wasn't to tear him down and to say you're doing X, Y, Z. It was to point out that, look, the polling is telling us, 30 different polls have told us that Democrats, 77% want you to stop arming Netanyahu. Just say you'll stop arming Netanyahu and uphold international law. The polls, and I'm sure you saw them, showed a consistent 6 to 8 points, sometimes a 10-point bump on this issue. We're of the generation, Chair Conrad, where our entire adult lives, our country's been at war. And I think our generation is sick and tired of war. And even now, that number has gone from 77% that's opposed the arms trade to Netanyahu to up to 92%. And despite that, the party still, the majority of Democrats are still voting to continue to fund a credibly accused war criminal. I'm not going to ask you your position because you've already been clear on your position, so I don't want to belabor the point. What I do want to ask you is, how do we convey to those who refuse to listen to the party that they're not going to get the votes of the members if they refuse to listen? And conversely, is there a way to convince voters that by re-electing the same people, you're going to get a different result when they're not willing to budge right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been challenging, since October 7th. I have been deeply, in these spaces, the chair of the Washington State Democrats, and working with our communities back here in Washington to make sure that we were creating a space that everyone who was being impacted by the conflict could feel that they could come to us. We were one of the first state parties in the country to pass a ceasefire resolution, and, and I signed on as a vice chair to the DNC onto a resolution that our chair had sort of been the key sponsor on in calling all of this out. And I will say, even, in my own state, we've had Representative Pramila Jayapal, who has called for an arms embargo, since the very beginning. But just recently, Representative Adam Smith, who is on the Armed Services Committee, also called for an arms embargo, which I take that as a real sign of that shift that is occurring. As I hear from so many of our grassroots leaders, both in my home state but also around the country, of people who are really saying the party has got to move to where the rest of the base is, which is to call this out. I'm not a foreign policy expert, and so I sort of typically believe that the folks who are making the decisions on how they're going to vote on these big decisions probably have more information than I do. But I do think that the way in which we have to continue to uplift the people who are being deeply impacted, which is, it's our Muslim community, Palestinian community, but it's so many people who are rightfully outraged by seeing the death that is, the murders that are happening, the killings that are happening. I mean, this is, it's death by starvation. Like, this is very real. And I think we have to continue to humanize what is happening, humanizing the conflict, so that it doesn't get stuck in the foreign policy speak where it can be something that is just theoretical, but it actually is about people. So I think that we've got to keep telling these stories and keep bringing that up. And then folks have to continue to be loud and pressure. And I'm watching as that grassroots pressure is making a difference as people are coming to the realization of where we need to be. So, keep it up, and keep pushing. And, our own chair, we had our DNC meeting just last week in Minneapolis. The resolutions committee, there were two resolutions related to Gaza. Both ended up not, both sort of failed, but our chair committed to a task force to make sure that we are continuing to be on this issue and continuing to push.
I mean, again, I commend you and the Washington Dems for being a leader in this space. But I'll be honest, and if Chair Martin were here, I would ask him that it's been nearly 2 years. According to estimates by Yale and Harvard, it's not just 80,000, but it's hundreds of thousands that have been killed. The global consensus is that it's genocide. 92% of your base wants you to stop arming Netanyahu. What's a task force committee going to do at this point? What are we negotiating? What are we investigating at this point? I mean, there needs to be action. It kind of goes back to the conversation earlier that, we get in power and then we have committees about meetings, about ideas, about selections. Meanwhile, the Republicans will come in and say, yeah, we don't really care about the Constitution. We're just going to do whatever the hell it is we want to do. And if you don't like it, tough luck. And I think that's where the frustration stems. And this kind of goes into the last part of what I wanted to chat with you about in the last few minutes that we have. What is the message of the Democratic Party as we, come into the fourth quarter of Trump's first year right now in office? Come January 1st, it's going to be a mad dash to the midterms. There's going to be billions spent on political ads, on influencers, on mailers, and swing states are going to be bombarded like they've never been bombarded before. What is the message of the Democratic Party to the American people to say, hey, we're out here with your best interest in heart. Even if you voted for Trump, you need to flip and vote for us. What is that clear message?
Well, I mean, I think it's really simple. It is that when we are in power, we've got to be making people's lives better. And that is like I always say, I believe everyone should have Democratic representation and Democratic leadership, because I have seen in my own state, in Washington, we were the only state that went more blue last year, that, we have great policies around paid family medical leave and a higher minimum wage. And, we really have been able to build a social safety net in Washington state that I think the entire country deserves and should have. But that also means that we as Democrats have to operate differently and have more of that type of energy when we get into office, that it has to be about making people's lives better and not doing this sort of glacial, incremental stuff that we often do. I really liked Governor Tim Walz said this a few months ago, where he's like, yeah, when we get back in power, we shouldn't be talking about 5% more Medicaid. No, we need to talk about universal health care. That's the energy we need to be bringing. So I think that is what we have to be really clear about, and it is people have to feel it, and so we have to make sure that we are uplifting policies that are going to do that. We've got to bring that fighting spirit. We have to, like I said earlier, we can't operate like business as usual. We have got to bring that type of energy that you're seeing. Look, there's a lot of bad happening, obviously, but Democrats have been overperforming in every special election that we have had. We are winning. We just last week had a big win in Iowa where it was a 21-point swing. And, we've been winning in places that many people thought we could never win. And as I travel this country, I hear from people who are having buyer's remorse about Trump all over the place. Yep. So, the chaos that we feel where it's a new headline every single day, it doesn't have to be like this. And we as Democrats have to remind people that, like, it can get better and it can be better, and that we will do that. We will lead that charge. Um, and I just, reminding people of like what to do for this year. We've got big governors races in Virginia and New Jersey that really matter. I was just out there last week doing Asian American Pacific Islander focused town halls where I really wanted to connect with our community. And folks are worried. It's not a given that, we're just going to win. So, and I had to fly through DC where I saw National Guard, troops right there, right? And so this is real. So we need folks to be, doing what they can, helping, make phone calls. If you can get out on the ground, encourage people to vote. And then, yeah, the whole ball game next year is going to be obviously taking back the House. And we were a little bit pessimistic around the Senate, but I think there's some opportunities that are opening up, and I'm excited about candidates that are running, like in Maine, that are running on, very sort of progressive platforms, and you're seeing that energy in places around this country that I think is really important. And I think we as Democrats oftentimes get stuck in the like, woe is me and everything is bad, and things are tough, challenges are everywhere, but there's also good, and there's people that we're meeting through all of this, like you and me meeting, today, right? That like we're finding ways to connect that are helping us get through this, and I think we need to lean into that where we can.
I love that. I mean, maintaining hope is such a critical component. James Baldwin talks about this extensively, that you can't tell the children there's no hope. You can be angry, but you can't despair.
Yes.
And so I'm excited to see you do that. You mentioned Maine, Grand Planter. There's Abdul El Sayed running in Michigan. There's a couple of really exciting races happening, and that I think that give me hope and give me something to engage in. Last couple of questions. One thing that I often hear from voters is, stop telling me just to vote harder. Like, I can only vote once. That's not enough, obviously. What do you see as the most effective thing? If somebody disagrees with you or with Chair Martin on a policy, what is the most effective way to make their voice heard before the election, before a policy is finalized? How can they make sure that they're not just spitting into the wind or screaming into the void, but actually having an impact behind what's important to them to make sure that their voice is not just heard but acted upon?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple of things. One is that, we have elected DNC members in every single state and territory across this country, and, folks can get involved in their like local state party and get to meet those folks, and they have an obvious direct line to us through the DNC. But also, I've been in so many spaces where Ken will give out his cell phone number to everybody, and he's a very open leader, and I'm like that too. I read all everything that comes through. So if people send me messages, I'm reading them. I'm taking them into stock as I think about where how I feel about things, and I'm also constantly advocating. I thought it was important to run and be a vice chair of the DNC because I thought it was really important to help fix it, right? To help rebuild it, to help push it. And as a progressive, that was really important to me as well. Bernie asked us to to move into the party back in 2016. And so, I think it's important that people get involved and stay involved and, continue to speak up and, and talk to your friends and family about why you care. Like that is the number one thing that moves people. And we have to be going into spaces that a long time, we've, like rural communities, young people, people of color, we sometimes took for granted or straight up didn't engage with. And we've got to be making sure that we are messaging, and actually making authentic connections with people across this country.
I love that. And just for those watching again, I think it was probably within an hour that we pitched this interview to Chair Conrad, and her team responded and said, sure, let's set it up. I was almost taken aback, like, oh, this was actually faster than I anticipated. And so I appreciate that your words are not mere words. They're backed by action. They're backed by sincerity and authenticity. And then the final question before we go, how can folks support you and the work you're doing to ensure that these progressive voices that are extraordinarily popular across the country get more light, get more attention?
I appreciate that. You can find me I'm at Shasti Conrad on pretty much every social media platform, and we're also at Wash Dems across all the various platforms for what we're doing in Washington State. But we hear a lot of the negative, but if you're liking what you're hearing and you want us to go in the direction as I'm talking about, like, let people know. I think it's really important that we're uplifting when you find those champions that are speaking out in a way like Mamdani, like AOC, like some of these other types of Beto O'Rourke. Like there's people that are out there messaging Gavin Newsom, like speak up about the people that you're liking, because I think that helps too, and it helps some of the other leaders see where the base is going and where people are moving to, and I think that is helpful.
Well, it's exciting for me, Chair Conrad, to see the future of our party being led by amazing, young, thoughtful leaders like you who walk the walk and aren't afraid to have these difficult conversations, where you're not afraid to acknowledge where the party needs to do better. I think people simply appreciate that. Nobody expects elected officials to be perfect, but we appreciate when folks say, hey, we're not doing as well as we need to and we can do better. And I just want to say very loudly and publicly that I appreciate your sincerity and your authenticity. I think it will travel far more than any kind of focus group crafted message. So thank you for your sincerity.
Thank you. This has been great. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Chair Conrad, Vice Chair of the DNC, Chair of Washington Dems, thank you for being with us. We hope to have you back on soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That, my friends, is DNC Vice Chair Shasti Conrad. I told you it would be a good interview and that she gave some great answers, and I think you'll agree that she gave some extraordinarily important, solid answers. The question really is what we do with this and how we move forward to activate and organize and kind of combat the lack of alignment of party leadership to what the party wants. And I commend Vice Chair Conrad for being able to call that out so thoughtfully and so authentically. And I think it's clear we have work to do. I think both things are absolutely true. I thank her for being on. Hope to have her on again. We're going to go to break. And when we come back from break, we'll be discussing two extraordinarily important issues. One is the 24-year anniversary of 9/11. Then, of course, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Your support is what makes this advocacy, this show possible. I will never have a paywall on my Substack, so your support is what helps me continue to create this content. As I mentioned, Sirius XM very graciously extended us for another year. I'm excited about that, excited to continue to bring you these important topics with national thought leaders. So hit that subscribe button and let's continue to work. I'm recording this the week of the 24-year anniversary of 9/11. And, I've written about this every year. I've talked about this every year. And as the time passes, it's become one of those moments in history that just kind of seems frozen in time. I remember as a young person in elementary school, our teacher talking about the Challenger explosion. I was still, I think, 4 years old when that happened, so I don't really remember it. But I remember our teacher talking about how at some point in our lives, some moment will happen, and you'll remember where you were when that happened. And for us, that moment was 9/11, right? For older millennials, for even younger millennials, that moment was 9/11. On 9/11, I was a 19-year-old college sophomore. I was among the last generations who was an adult prior to 9/11, and I got to see firsthand all the changes that went in our country and our world through that day because of that event. And I just want to make 3 quick points. One, the perspective on mourning, like mourning, like mourning, like grief. And yes, we mourn the 2,977 Americans who were killed on that day. Innocent people viciously ripped away from their families. And we pray for them, their departed, their families, we cherish their memories. And the conversation can't just stop there because there's so much more to remember. 10,000 American soldiers killed in 2 unjust wars. And depending on the estimates that you follow, hundreds of thousands to millions of Afghan and Iraqi civilians killed, $8 trillion wasted on the so-called war on terror. That's $250 million a day for more than 2 decades. Meanwhile, sending us into massive debt. Housing is out of control. Healthcare is unaffordable. People are living in poverty. 1 in 6 Americans are food insecure. And so I want you to think about just the ramifications of that. It can't just stop at the nearly 3,000 civilians killed in the United States. We have to think about the broader implications, because those implications are affecting us to this day. Barbara Lee was the sole vote against the war. Representative Barbara Lee. And unfortunately, she was right. And I say unfortunately because I wanted peace. I think everybody wanted peace. But she was right that, black woman who was right. Maybe we should think about that and listen to more black women. But she was right, and in the denial of the basic decency and justice that moment demanded, the lack of that has gotten us to where we are. 2, a perspective on history. I keep seeing these memes that I don't ever want another 9/11, but I miss America on 9/12 when we were unified and people were working together and there was national unity. And it says, on 9/12 what mattered more was what united us rather than what divided us. And I'm sorry, but that's just a bunch of crap, because that never happened. If after all these years you still think that the weeks and months after 9/11 were days of unity, then you have not been paying attention to the black and brown people in your life, to the Muslims, to the immigrants in your life, the people in your life who feared for our safety and suffered a massive spike in hate crimes for something we had nothing to do with. That so-called myth of unity means ignoring the massive spike in anti-Muslim, anti-Hindu, anti-Sikh, anti-Arab hate crimes post 9/11. It means ignoring the Patriot Act, which violated our privacy. It means ignoring the NYPD's illegal spying on American Muslims for 6 years, which, by the way, they never found a single act of anybody doing anything wrong. Didn't stop the demonization of Muslims. Didn't stop the dozens of states who tried to pass anti-Sharia laws, of the torture at Guantanamo Bay, the CIA torture, the indiscriminate drone strikes, and the Muslim ban, all of which denied basic justice that our Constitution promises. They're all connected. The unity was if you unquestionably supported what George Bush called a crusade that God told him to wage. I mean, think about this. There's a headline in The Guardian published right around 2003 saying that George Bush says, God told me to end tyranny in Iraq. He famously said this, whitewashing objections that this so-called crusade is going to kill hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. He said, no, I don't care. God told me to do this. How is that okay? How is that not religious extremism? The president of the most nuclear armed power in the world saying God told him to invade a country and kill civilians. It's sociopathic. And then finally, a perspective on the future. This revisionist history of unity undermines the lived experiences of marginalized minority communities in this country. For us to have a future based on justice, it's going to require us to reconcile with that and to counter that with actual meaningful justice. And I want to shift to the second part of the conversation today about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the anger that people are feeling right now, the righteous anger. And I call it righteous because anytime someone is killed, people get angry and have a right to be angry. I wrote about this, and it's gotten an interesting response from a lot of folks, where I even wrote that I hesitate to publish this because emotions are high and social media is volatile, but I'm doing so anyway because I believe erring on the side of empathy is the only human thing to do right now. Hannah Arendt is once reported to have said that the death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most telling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. And this quote has echoed in my mind as I reflect on the assassination of Kirk. We've seen a disturbing cruelty take hold in our politics. I want to be clear. I extend empathy to Kirk and I pray for his family not because of who he is, but because of who I am. I do so not because I find a single redeeming quality in his personality or character. I honestly don't. But I do so because I care about how we move forward as a country when violence has tragically and increasingly become the norm. Because this is not sustainable. So the question is, why have empathy for those who never extended it? I know this is hard. We saw the cruelty of the MAGA right when Minnesota Democratic Speaker Melissa Hortman was assassinated in a targeted attack just 2 months ago. And to this day, Donald Trump has never bothered to condemn that political violence or extend his sympathies. So why have empathy for those who show none? And it gets even more difficult to have empathy when you recall that Kirk once sneered, and this is a quote, an exact quote from Kirk, where he said, "I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term, and it does a lot of damage," end quote. He went on to falsely claim that gun saves lives, and he even argued, after the shooting death of children, that it was, quote, worth it for some people to die from gun violence every year just so the Second Amendment could exist. He dehumanized immigrants, Muslims, LGBTQ people, black people, Palestinians, women, and more. So why have empathy for those who show none? And speaking of children being killed by gun violence, he refused to take seriously that epidemic. Annually, guns are now the leading cause of death, preventable death for children in America. And we saw another school shooting the same day that Kirk was killed. While he was the victim of gun violence in Utah, at least 4 students, including the shooter, were injured in a school shooting at Evergreen High School in Colorado. You barely heard mention of this. Trump never even talked about it. Our nation has already suffered more than 300 mass shootings in 2025, and it's only September. So why have empathy for those who show none? And finally, Kirk particularly detested Muslims in the religion of Islam. He particularly detested me. He constantly demonized Muslims, referred to us as Mohammedans, in an attempt to berate and deny us our identity. So why would I, an American Muslim who gets plenty of hate from Kirk supporters, and I've gotten it since he was killed, why would I bother to have empathy? And the answer is that despite his hatred for me and my faith, I return to what my faith actually teaches me on this. There's a powerful verse of the Quran where God says that let not a people's enmity incite you to act otherwise than with justice. Be always just. That's the standard that we're called to. And see, the thing is, 2 things can simultaneously be true. I can detest what Kirk stood for and the hatred he spread and work ferociously to counter his hate, and I can be sure not to allow his hate transform me into a hateful person as well. I will not allow his fear of the other infect my ability to see the humanity in the other. My standard is justice. Always, and that will never change. And here's the thing, you don't actually need to even agree with me. For those who feel no empathy for Kirk, I get it. He inflicted harm on countless people, and none of us are a light switch where we can just flip on and flip off our feelings at will. So if you have no empathy for Kirk, no judgment for me, none. And likewise, if you're struggling, take the time to find your peace, find your center, pray, meditate, eat ice cream, tickle a baby, snuggle a puppy, go for a run, watch your favorite film. Remember what makes you human. I can only express how I feel and how I'm managing these moments in our nation's history because, indeed, we are living through one of the most volatile times in our nation's history. Yes, Kirk bore much responsibility for spreading disinformation and misinformation that fueled the division and violence we're seeing right now. But his death cannot tempt us into abandoning the only thing that makes us human, and that is our empathy. Because look, at the current trajectory of increasing violence, this is simply not sustainable. So for me, this is a moment to double down not on hate, but to expand our spheres of compassion, to deepen our service to humanity, to increase our engagement with those willing to engage, to refuse to give up hope on this country and this world, and to continue our fight for justice for all people. Because at the end of the day, I have little doubt that those in power will try to use Kirk's death as an attempt to further divide, create discord, and create distrust. So why have empathy to those who show none? Because empathy is our inoculation to that hatred and fear. It is not weakness. It is strength. It is not acceptance of violence and bigotry. It is rejection of cruelty and hate. We have empathy not dependent upon whether others behave like decent human beings, but because we are decent human beings. That is how we build a future committed to justice, not violence. We have empathy because it is what keeps us human. And that, my friends, that is something that we cannot afford to lose. All right. Whew. Thanks for letting me vent. Thanks for letting me get that out of my system. As we wrap up the show, I want to again extend my gratitude to Vice Chair DSC, Vice Chair Shasti, Conrad for having these tough conversations. We have a long way to go to build a truly just future. And I'm excited and grateful that leaders like her are in that position. Hopefully she can get more power and we can actually implement the policies that so many Americans want. Things like universal health care, ending this genocide in Palestine, getting corporate money out of politics. And then as you think about the legacy of 9/11, as you think about people like Charlie Kirk, think about what role you can play to counter the hate, to counter the division, to counter the fear. And I think that begins with empathy. And look, every person's at their own level. There's no right or wrong level and no judgment for me. I want to be very clear about that. I'm just sharing what I've come to terms with and where I will continue to fight and push forward. Because at the end of the day, this is the world that I have to create for my children. And I want to make sure that moving forward, I create a world where my children have less fear, less hate, less violence to deal with than what my generation had. And I think we can make that possible, but we have to be deliberate about it. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Your support and advocacy goes a long way towards helping my support and advocacy. Be sure to follow me on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. You have my promise to continue to advance the show that builds on compassion, on justice, and on accountability for those in power. Got a really great show lined up for next week. Be sure to tune in, same time, same place at 10 a.m. on Sunday on Sirius XM, Urban News Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Or hit that subscribe button on Substack and enter your email and get it sent to you automatically as soon as it goes live. My friends, be fierce, lead with compassion and justice, and continue speaking truth to power. Until next week, peace.